In 1937, in the heart of the Soviet Union, a modern state turned inward and began destroying its own people at industrial speed. The place was not a battlefield or a famine zone. It was offices, police headquarters, apartments, prisons, and forest clearings on the edge of towns. The primary agent driving this story was not a mob or a riot, but a system. The Soviet security apparatus, acting under political orders to identify, process, and eliminate enemies of the state. Its objective was deceptively simple: cleanse the country of internal threats, prove loyalty, prevent imagined conspiracies before they could form. The stakes were absolute. If the system succeeded, the state would be purified and secure. If it failed, suspicion itself would become endless, and anyone could be next. What makes 1937 different from earlier waves of repression is not just the scale of killing, but the method. Violence was no longer improvised. It was scheduled. Murder was no longer argued over. It was processed. The question this story answers is not whether terror existed in Stalin's Soviet Union. The question is how killing became routine, how it became fast, and how it became ordinary. On paper, nothing dramatic is happening. A document is typed. Names are added to lists. Categories are checked. Numbers are tallied against quotas. A signature is applied at the bottom of a page. But that page carries a weight that cannot be seen in ink. It determines who will be arrested tonight, who will be interrogated tomorrow, and who will be taken into a forest and shot before the week is over. For the people caught inside this system, the terror does not arrive as chaos. It arrives as procedure. A knock at the door after midnight, an arrest warrant already filled out, a brief search, no explanation. In interrogation rooms, confessions are produced not to establish truth, but to complete files. The paperwork must be consistent. Each case must look finished. Each operation must meet its numbers. This is how mass killing becomes possible without mass hysteria. The bureaucracy absorbs responsibility. No single person has to decide that 1 million people should die. Each official only signs a form, approves a list, meets a target, or forwards a file. The system does the rest. Terror no longer depends on rage. It depends on compliance. By the end of 1938, roughly 1 million human beings will be dead, executed, or destroyed by the machinery set in motion during this period. Many of them will be loyal party members, state officials, military officers, workers, and peasants. The terror will consume not only the public, but the very institutions enforcing it. This is not a story about clerical error or accidental cruelty. Nothing here is a mistake. This is a story about how a government learned to turn fear into administration, ideology into paperwork, and murder into a process so efficient that it could be repeated thousands of times a day. To understand how that happened, you have to begin not with a gun, but with a form. Moscow, summer 1937. The Soviet capital is a city of new stone and old fear. A place where banners hang from buildings that still remember revolution and civil war. Inside government offices, the air smells of ink, tobacco, and stale paper. The state speaks in decrees, and decrees become reality, because millions of people behave as if the paper is a law of nature. Joseph Stalin sits at the top of this system, the leader who has outlasted rivals and survived crises by learning a simple lesson: power is never secure. In Stalin's imagination, danger is never only outside the borders. Danger is inside the party, inside the army, inside factories, inside apartments, inside a careless sentence spoken at the wrong table. The Soviet political world has been tightening for years. After the assassination of Sergei Kirov in 1934, a party leader whose death is still surrounded by suspicion, the search for enemies becomes a permanent state of mind. Trials in Moscow put old revolutionaries on public display, confessing to absurd conspiracies, insisting they are guilty of plotting against the socialist state. Some of that theater is aimed outward, to convince the population that threats are real. Some is aimed inward, to teach officials that survival depends on accepting whatever the state says is true. By 1937, the country is also anxious about war. Nazi Germany has rearmed. Japan is expanding in Asia. Stalin's Soviet Union is industrializing at a brutal pace, and the human cost of the previous decade, collectivization, famine, forced labor, has left scars that can be read in empty villages and crowded cities. The regime's strength is obvious, but so is its insecurity. In that atmosphere, the most dangerous thing a person can be is difficult to measure, doubtful, unclassifiable, not easily placed in a box. So the state builds boxes. In late July 1937, the People's Commissariat for Internal Affairs, better known by its Russian initials, the NKVD, issues an order that sounds like administration and functions like a weapon. It targets anti-Soviet elements, a category elastic enough to stretch over almost anyone. Former kulaks, who were labeled enemies during collectivization, people with criminal records, people suspected of hostility, people denounced by neighbors, people attached in the imagination of the state to the wrong past. The order does something crucial. It assigns numbers. Each region receives quotas for arrests and punishments, 2 categories cleanly separated on paper. Category 1, execution. Category 2, labor camps. The terror is no longer only a mood, it is an operation with targets, deadlines, and reporting requirements. The state has taken suspicion and turned it into a plan. The paperwork moves quickly. Copies are typed and sent out. In regional capitals and industrial towns, NKVD officers open envelopes and begin to read. The pages carry the authority of Moscow. They also carry a promise. Meet these numbers, and you prove your loyalty. Fail, and you invite suspicion onto yourself. Within weeks, a machinery that had always existed in some form begins to spin faster than it ever has. A system designed to police becomes a system designed to consume. The Soviet Union is vast, and the terror spreads across its geography like a set of instructions arriving at thousands of desks at once. In a provincial NKVD headquarters, brick walls, barred windows, corridors that smell of disinfectant and sweat, men gather around a table. Some are ideologues, some are careerists, some are frightened. All of them understand that the paper in front of them is not an invitation to debate. There is an immediate problem. Quotas are numbers, but the province is not a neat mathematical object. There are not enough obvious enemies to fill the categories unless the definition of enemy becomes broader. And broadening the definition creates its own logic. Once you begin, stopping looks like weakness. The officers start with lists already available, names of people exiled years earlier, people who returned from internal deportation, people who were arrested once and released, people who complained at work, people who received letters from relatives abroad, people whose biographies contain the wrong line, a father who owned land, a brother who served in the wrong army during the Civil War, a past membership in a political faction that is now illegal history. Then the process becomes more improvisational because the quotas demand improvisation. Denunciations arrive, written in angry handwriting. Some are ideological, some are personal. A neighbor wants a room in a communal apartment. A foreman wants a troublesome worker gone. An official wants to demonstrate vigilance. In a society trained to fear being accused, accusation becomes a kind of currency. A local official sends a request upward. The quotas are too low. There are more enemies than Moscow imagines. More numbers are needed. The request itself is a signal, an offer of zeal. If Moscow approves, it is not only permission to arrest more people, it is an endorsement of the official's political instincts. If Moscow refuses, the official still has to meet the original numbers. Either way, the terror advances. This is one of the moral tricks of the Great Purge. It contains direction from above, but it also contains a scramble from below. Stalin and the NKVD leadership create the framework, orders, categories, quotas, emergency courts, and then regional officials compete inside it, pushing the boundaries to prove loyalty or to settle scores or to avoid becoming targets themselves. The structure rewards excess and then later punishes excess when convenient. The system is both controlled and out of control, in the same way a machine can be designed to run fast and still fling off sparks. Now the paperwork needs bodies. A knock comes after midnight in an apartment building that looks like hundreds of other buildings. A hallway light buzzes. A woman wakes first, then wakes her husband. Their children do not fully understand what the sound means, but their bodies do. In a state where arrest has become a common rumor, a late-night knock doesn't feel like a visitor, it feels like a verdict. The door opens to men in leather coats. An officer reads an arrest warrant that has already decided the story. The name is correct. The accusation is vague. Anti-Soviet agitation. Participation in a counter-revolutionary organization. Sabotage. The words are interchangeable. They exist to justify the action, not to describe it. There is a search. Books are pulled from shelves. Letters are examined. An old photograph is held up to the light as if guilt could be found in the angle of a smile. The officers do not argue. They do not need to persuade. They have paperwork. They have authority. The husband is allowed to dress. Sometimes he is allowed to take a toothbrush. Sometimes he is not. The family's questions are met with silence or rehearsed phrases. The neighbors' doors remain closed. In communal life, empathy is dangerous. Witnessing is dangerous. It is safer to pretend to sleep. Downstairs, the street is empty. The air smells of summer dust or winter smoke, depending on the month, but the feeling is always the same. The city has become a set of private fears. The man is pushed into a vehicle, the door closes, the engine starts, the building recedes. The family is left with a single new identity, relatives of an enemy. At the NKVD office, the man becomes a file. A clerk writes his details on a form: name, birth date, occupation, party membership, social origin, address, relatives, past arrests. Every line is a place to categorize him. Every category is a place to blame him. The system does not need an accurate portrait of who he is. The system needs him to fit a template. In the basement, interrogation begins. Fluorescent light reflects off sweat. Cigarette smoke sits in the air like a second ceiling. The interrogator's problem is not moral but procedural. The case file must contain a confession. The confession must connect the suspect to an organization because organizations justify networks, and networks justify more arrests. Sometimes the confession comes quickly, especially if the suspect believes truth matters and can defend him. Sometimes the confession comes after days without sleep, after beatings, after threats against family. The methods vary, but the purpose is consistent. Produce a statement that completes the paperwork. The suspect is presented with pages already typed. He is told to sign. If he refuses, the interrogator can wait. The NKVD has time, but it also has quotas, and quotas create impatience. The state is not searching for truth. The state is manufacturing a record. When the suspect finally signs, whether from exhaustion, terror, or calculation, something changes. The confession is not just a personal collapse. It is a bureaucratic tool. It contains names. Those names become new files. New files become new arrests. And because the confessions are forced, the names are often chosen at random, or chosen from people already disliked, or chosen from the safe targets of the moment: colleagues, neighbors, former associates. The suspect is pressured to give the system what it wants: a web. The Great Purge expands like a contagion because paperwork creates chains. In a room upstairs, 3 men sit at a table. One is an NKVD officer, one is a local party official, one is a state prosecutor or administrator. Together they form a troika, an emergency tribunal designed for speed. The troika exists because normal courts are too slow, and slowness is now treated as weakness. Law is not the point. Output is. Files arrive in stacks. Each file contains a confession, an accusation, and a proposed sentence. The troika flips pages, glances at signatures, checks categories. There are no witnesses, no defense lawyers, no appeal. The accused is not present. The person is reduced to paper, and paper can be processed quickly. The troika's work is measured in numbers: dozens of cases in an hour, hundreds in a day, names spoken aloud like inventory. Sometimes the men pause, not from sympathy, but from fatigue. Sometimes they joke, because humor is a way to distance the mind from the act. Sometimes they drink. A stamp hits paper. A signature follows: Category 1, Category 2, Category 1, Category 1, Category 2. The language is clinical, and that is the point. Clinical language makes violence feel like hygiene. When the troika finishes a batch, the signed pages move to the next link in the chain. Guards receive orders. Transport is arranged. A list is compiled. Each line on the list corresponds to a body. On the edge of Moscow, at places like Butovo and Kommunarka, the state has prepared landscapes for secrecy. These are not public killing grounds. They are controlled spaces, fenced or hidden, where executions can occur without witnesses. The very existence of such places is a confession about the state's relationship to its own violence. It needs the killing to happen, and it needs the killing to be unseen. Trucks arrive at night. Prisoners are moved in groups. Their hands are bound. Their names are checked against lists. The men who perform the executions are not wild-eyed fanatics. They are employees. Some are cruel, some are numb, some are terrified. They have orders. They have quotas. They have paperwork telling them who must die. A prisoner steps out, and a guard reads a name. The prisoner answers. Sometimes the prisoner tries to speak. Sometimes the prisoner prays. Sometimes the prisoner is already silent, hollowed out by interrogation and fear. The guards move the prisoner forward. A shot cracks the night. Another. Another. The bodies fall into pits prepared in advance, because preparation is efficiency. This is where the title stops being metaphor. Bureaucracy does not kill by itself, but bureaucracy creates the conditions where killing can be performed like a task. A list can be checked off. A quota can be met. A report can be sent back to Moscow. Operation progressing successfully. In the morning, the city wakes. People go to work. Trams run. Factories open. Newspapers print articles about vigilance against enemies. The terror exists as rumor, as absence, as a door sealed with wax, as a desk suddenly empty. Life continues because life has to continue, and because acknowledging the terror openly would be a form of self-incrimination. Silence becomes another administrative rule, unwritten but enforced. And the bureaucracy keeps expanding because the system now needs to justify itself. If so many enemies are being discovered, then enemies must be everywhere. If enemies are everywhere, then the system must keep searching. The logic is circular, perfect, and deadly. At the top of the state, the terror serves another purpose. It is not only about imagined threats, it is about control. The Soviet Union is a dictatorship built on a party, and a party that remembers debate is, to Stalin, a party that might debate again. Old Bolsheviks, men who helped build the revolution, have prestige that cannot be manufactured. The army has authority that can become independent. Regional officials have local power that can become a rival. So the terror targets institutions that could resist, even in theory. In June 1937, the Red Army's leadership is shaken by accusations of treason. Marshal Mikhail Tukhachevsky, one of the most prominent military commanders, is arrested. The trial is swift and secret. Confessions are extracted. The verdict is predetermined. Executions follow. The purge spreads through the officer corps, ripping out experienced commanders and replacing them with men chosen not only for competence but for political safety. The pressure here is strategic as well as psychological. Stalin fears military conspiracy. Stalin fears military autonomy. Stalin fears defeat in a coming war. The paradox is that by purging the military, Stalin makes the Soviet Union less prepared for the conflict he believes is approaching. But in a system built on suspicion, the immediate danger is always internal, because internal danger feels controllable. External danger is chaos. Internal danger can be solved with paperwork. The purge of the army also sends a message to everyone else. Even the most powerful uniform is not protection. If a marshal can be labeled an enemy, no one is safe. The terror now has momentum, and momentum demands new targets. In August 1937, the NK-5D expands operations to focus on ethnic minorities and foreign connections. One of the most notorious is the Polish operation, a campaign that treats Polish ethnicity, Polish heritage, or contact with Poland as evidence of espionage. Similar operations target Germans, Latvians, Finns, and others, groups imagined as potential fifth columns in a world drifting toward war. This is bureaucracy at its most chillingly abstract. Ethnicity becomes a checkbox, a surname becomes suspicious, a letter from abroad becomes a trap. A person's ancestry, something that cannot be changed, becomes an administrative vulnerability. In border regions and major cities, NKVD officers open new folders. They compile lists from workplaces, neighborhoods, and old records. They arrest people not because of something they did, but because of who they are said to be. The system's need for enemies turns identity into evidence. Families disappear in clusters. Entire communities learn to avoid speaking their own languages in public. Names are Russified. Histories are hidden. A state that claims to represent the working class turns whole segments of its population into paperwork-defined threats. The phrase, "the bureaucracy that killed 1 million people," begins to feel insufficient because the terror is not one operation. It is a portfolio of operations, overlapping, reinforcing, feeding off each other. Yet the pattern remains the same. Orders create categories. Categories produce lists. Lists produce arrests. Arrests produce confessions. Confessions produce networks. Networks justify more arrests. The system is not satisfied by reaching the quotas. The system learns that quotas can be exceeded, and exceeding quotas looks like loyalty. But the terror has an additional twist, one that makes it even more effective. It eventually eats the people running it. By 1938, fear has metastasized inside the NKVD itself. Officers who were zealous in 1937 begin to look dangerous in 1938 because zeal creates witnesses. If an NKVD official knows too much, if he participated in too many interrogations, if he signed too many lists, then he carries secrets that could become liabilities. The regime also needs a way to control the narrative. It cannot admit that the terror was policy. It needs to preserve the idea that the Soviet state is fundamentally just, even if harsh. That requires scapegoats, officials who can be blamed for excesses. Nikolai Yezhov, the head of the NKVD during the peak of the terror, is a man whose name becomes attached to the period itself. The Yezhovshchina is shorthand for a time when arrests and executions flooded the country. Yet Yezhov is not the source of the terror. He is a functionary elevated to execute a policy, and like so many others, he is disposable. In late 1938, Stalin replaces Yezhov with Lavrentiy Beria. The change is presented as a correction. Beria arrives with promises to restore legality and discipline, to rein in arbitrary arrests, to punish those who abused their power. Some NKVD officers are arrested. Some are executed. The institution purges itself in a grim parody of justice. The conflict here is internal survival. NKVD men who spent 1937 interrogating others now find themselves in the interrogation chair. They face the same demands. Confess. Name names, explain the chaos as the work of a conspiracy. The bureaucracy that consumed the population turns its mouth inward and begins to chew its own teeth. This is how the system maintains control while changing direction. It can slow the terror without admitting that the terror was deliberate. It can claim that the problem was not policy, but implementation. Not murder, but mistakes. The paperwork shifts, and the story shifts with it. For the people already arrested, the change at the top does not mean safety. It means uncertainty. Some cases are reviewed, some sentences are commuted, many are not. The machine is still running. It is simply adjusting its speed. Those who are not executed, Category 2, are shipped into another bureaucratic universe, the labor camp system, the gulag. The transport itself is procedural. Prisoners are packed into train cars, guards carry lists, stations are points on a schedule. The Soviet Union's geography becomes part of the punishment. In the camps, people vanish into work brigades and barracks. They are assigned numbers, rations, tasks. The purpose is officially economic: extract labor, build canals, mine resources. But the camps also function as a social graveyard. People are removed from society and made to exist in a parallel state, one where survival depends on health, luck, and the ability to navigate brutal hierarchies. The Great Purge's death toll is often discussed in numbers, and numbers matter because they reveal scale. Archival figures suggest that hundreds of thousands, roughly 700,000, were executed during the peak years, and well over 1 million were arrested. When you add those who died in custody, in transport, and in the camps as a direct consequence of these operations, the toll climbs toward the kind of round figure that becomes shorthand, about 1 million dead. The exact accounting is less important than the reality it points to. The Soviet state created a killing and confinement system so large that its victims can only be measured in populations. And those victims do not simply disappear physically, they disappear bureaucratically. Families write letters asking where a husband has gone, where a daughter has gone, where a brother has gone. The state answers with phrases designed to seal off inquiry. 10 years without the right to correspond. It sounds like a sentence of imprisonment. In many cases, it is a lie. It is a way to conceal execution while maintaining a facade of legality. This is a final cruelty of paperwork. It does not only kill, it edits reality. A mother receives a notice that her son has been sentenced. She does not know he was shot within days. She waits for a letter. Years pass. Hope rots into ritual. The state has turned grief into an administrative limbo. Meanwhile, the public language of the country adapts. Newspapers praise vigilance. Posters celebrate the party. Meetings include speeches about enemies and traitors, about sabotage and spies. The population learns to speak in safe phrases to avoid the dangerous details of actual experience. Everyone understands that the state is watching, and everyone understands that the state can be made to watch by a neighbor. This is how the terror becomes not only a set of arrests and executions, but a social environment. It reshapes friendships. It reshapes marriage. It reshapes what a person dares to think in front of a child. And yet, the system that runs on fear also runs on ordinary human weaknesses: vanity, ambition, resentment, cowardice. A person writes a denunciation because he believes it will protect him. Another person signs a troika verdict because he believes refusal would be suicidal. Another person participates because he believes the victims are real enemies. Another person participates because he believes nothing and belief is irrelevant to survival. Inside that web, individual morality doesn't disappear, but it gets crowded out by incentives. Bureaucracy doesn't erase choice. It fragments choice into tiny actions, each one easy to justify. A clerk tells himself he is only typing. An interrogator tells himself he is only extracting truth. A troika member tells himself he is defending the revolution. An executioner tells himself he is only following orders. Each link in the chain feels smaller than the outcome. The chain is what kills. The Great Purge does not last forever at its peak intensity. By 1939, the worst wave has receded. The Soviet Union, exhausted and scarred, continues to function. People return to work. New officials fill empty posts. Children grow up in a society where absence is normal and questions are dangerous. The terror leaves the state with a different kind of strength. It has removed rivals. It has disciplined the party. It has trained the population in silence, but it has also hollowed institutions. It has damaged competence. It has created a culture where telling the truth can be lethal and where loyalty is proven by aggression. When war comes in 1941, the Soviet Union bleeds. The Red Army, deprived of many experienced officers, suffers catastrophic losses in the first months of the German invasion. That is not the only reason for the disaster. War is complex. But the purge's shadow is present in the chaos. The state that killed in the name of security enters its greatest security crisis less prepared than it might have been. During the war, the Soviet Union mobilizes and survives. Stalin becomes a symbol of resistance. The regime tightens again. Repression continues in other forms. The machinery of control, once built, does not disappear. Bureaucracy is reusable. After Stalin's death in 1953, the Soviet leadership faces a problem that is both political and moral. How does a state that claimed moral superiority explain the mass violence it inflicted on itself? How does it acknowledge without collapsing its own legitimacy? In 1956, Nikita Khrushchev delivers a secret speech to party officials, denouncing Stalin's cult of personality and some of the crimes of the era. The speech is controlled, an internal confession meant to reform the system without destroying it. It names terror, but it does not fully dismantle the machinery that allowed terror. It blames Stalin's excesses more than the institutional logic. It is a political act, not a full reckoning. For many families, the speech does not bring closure. It opens old wounds. It confirms what people suspected, but suspicion is not the same as knowing. The bodies are still in forests. The files are still in archives. Decades later, in the late Soviet period and after the Soviet Union's collapse, another bureaucratic process begins: rehabilitation. Families apply for information. Officials open dusty folders. They stamp documents that declare someone was unjustly convicted. They issue certificates of innocence decades after the bullet. A man who died in 1937 becomes, in the 1980s or 1990s, a case file reopened. The same system that once created paperwork to justify killing now creates paperwork to admit, in measured language, that killing was wrong. Even then, bureaucracy shapes the truth. Some archives remain closed. Some records are missing. Some executions were recorded under euphemisms. Some families receive partial answers, dates without details, causes of death that still sound sanitized. The paper tells the truth in fragments because the paper was designed to serve power, not memory. And yet, those fragments matter. A granddaughter reads a file and sees her grandfather reduced to a confession she knows cannot be real. She sees the signatures of officials who stamped his life into Category 1. She sees the date of execution. She sees the place. She learns that her family's silence had a shape. This is the last twist in the story of the bureaucracy that killed 1 million people. Paper that once acted as an instrument of disappearance becomes, later, the only way to bring the disappeared back into history. The bureaucracy that killed also preserved evidence of its own function, because bureaucracies cannot help but document themselves. Even murder, when turned into procedure, leaves trails. The Great Purge is often described as madness, as paranoia, as a dictator's bloodlust. Those descriptions capture something real, but they can also make the event feel distant, like a nightmare that happened because one man was uniquely monstrous. The more unsettling truth is closer to the title. The Great Purge happened because a modern state learned to treat human beings as administrative units. It learned to translate fear into categories, categories into quotas, quotas into files, and files into lists. It learned to distribute responsibility so widely that the act of killing could be broken into tasks that ordinary people could perform and still sleep. The brutality was not only in the gunshot in a forest. The brutality was in the calmness of the process that delivered the gunshot. In 1937 and 1938, the Soviet Union proved that terror does not require chaos. Terror can be organized. Terror can be standardized. Terror can be turned into paperwork. And once a state learns that lesson, the most dangerous thing it can do is convince itself that paperwork makes murder clean.